And we're live.
We're live again?
How are you, Pablo?
Good, good. And you?
Excellent.
Good.
So today's going to be a fun one.
Yep.
We're going to talk about a very mysterious document, would you say, or booklet. And
it's a manuscript.
And you introduced me to this years ago.
Yes.
I mean, I remember you talking about this over 10 years ago.
Yes.
It's called the Voynich Manuscript.
Correct.
What do you want to start with?
It has more questions than ever before. It's an incredible book, and nobody can decipher it. I'll tell you this. I took some notes because I want to be very thorough on this one. And the U.S. Intelligence Service, okay, was given this book, and there was a man by the name of William Friedman, who was a world-renowned cryptologist, and his team. And they studied it to try to unveil the secrets within its pages. And they were able to decrypt this every single document that was presented to them in the course of their careers, except this one. They even did something, I think, for World War I or II, some Japanese encoded messages. They were able to break everything. And this is the only document that they were not able to decipher it. Now, so that everybody gets an idea, it's not just one page. It is actually 200 pages filled with writings and tremendous amount of pictures. They call it allegorical. And it's done on parchments, okay, which is organic paper. It comes from animals. And I think they mentioned it was sheep. And so it could be carbon dated because it's an organic matter. And it's just extremely interesting. Nobody has been able to decipher it. And for those of you that are aware of the Voynich manuscript, it was recently outsourced. Recently meaning maybe 5 years ago or something like that. So you can actually go online and look at it and try to see if you can figure it out. And there's been a few, 5 or 6 people in different parts of the world that have said, I've come up with the answer. Mm-hmm. But they've all been debunked. The latest one being a guy in Germany. And I'm sure that they are extremely intelligent people. But it's just something that, is quite interesting. Yeah. And, it was found in a monastery in, I believe, a part of Italy. And it was a place called Villa Mondragone. And I could never remember the guy's first name, man, until I gave him a Spanish twist. So I call him Wilfredo. Wilfredo. I started calling him Wilfredo, and I remember. It's Wilfred Voynich. And he was an antique collector. He would travel the world, and he went to this Villa Mondragone. And he was actually extremely interested in ancient books, old books. And they brought this, what do you call it? A
case?
Yeah, a case.
A chest?
Yeah, a chest of books. And within that chest, he found several that he liked. But this one, it was a trunk, they say. And that was in the 1700s. Anyway, and so it's got over 170,000 characters.
Yeah.
And it was in Rome. And it was apparently they were giving books from Jesuits schools and stuff like that. This trunk, where he found a book, belonged to a guy named Athanasius Kircher. Okay? Which Athanasius Kircher was a very intelligent man in the 1700s. So this book comes, it's tremendous. And I took some notes because it fascinates me. And it also allowed me to put into, standardize my thoughts on it. Because I was all over the place because I've read so much about it.
Yeah.
So being able to take notes was really good.
Yeah. No, and when I was looking into it and preparing for this, I remember hearing different theories over the years, and some of the things that I saw recently is they were talking about it being an extinct language, and that's part of why it hasn't been able to be deciphered yet.
That's one theory.
That's one theory. Other crazy theories out there, right? You know, that it's not from this world and stuff. But
you go down a rabbit hole.
But the drawings in particular are very, and that's one thing that was I saw common in many of the critiques or the analysis was they look very amateur type of drawings. Somewhat, right? Yeah. Like almost not cartoonish, but that's why one of the theories is that maybe it was Leonardo da Vinci's.
As a young boy.
It was debunked. Been debunked as well. But definitely there's different parts of the book, right? Some of them touch on astronomy.
Yes.
Some of them touch on herbs.
Yes.
And maybe like pharmaceutical, like herbal type of remedies. Some touch on I'm not sure if that's the section that touches on the plants.
It is.
And then you have these interesting drawings of
naked ladies.
Yeah, naked ladies. They
in swimming pools or bathtubs.
And there's color to the manuscript.
Right.
You know, green and so. Anyways, I even saw one that there's a dragon, and the dragon looks like
infantile.
Yeah, it looks like a kid drew it.
Right. That's so, you know, one of the things that allow me to understand it better is that, by the way, it's in the Voynich library at Yale University.
That's and where it is right now.
It's heavily guarded. Heavily guarded.
Was it ever at the Huntington Library?
No, not to my knowledge.
No, that was something else.
That's something else. That's the Red Sea squirrels.
Oh, got it.
But anyway, so you can... One thing that allowed me, and I think it would be real good for everybody if they want to look into it, the book is characterized into different sections. The first section is botanical and plants, because it shows roots and flowers and so forth. So botanical is a big section of the book. Then, like you said, it has zodiac charts. And they just don't quite add up on the constellations.
There's a few things that are off.
Yeah, they're off. And then it's actually got an optical phenomenon, which in some of the pages that fold out, you can actually do a motion on them. Like when you go like this and you move the pages, it has like a little optical phenomenon. The ladies are moving in one direction.
Like, yeah, those picture books.
Yeah.
That you can see movement.
Right.
As you go through the
So pages. That's, and then finally, there's an area for recipes. So that very simple structure of breaking it up into 4 sections allowed me to really get a handle on the entire mystery on all of this. You know, it's very, very interesting. The major portion of the book is they tend to think it's herbal and medical. Okay? And
pharmaceutical types of
correct
remedies and stuff.
Right. Now there was one interesting thing that, you know, I read, and it's I haven't read it again. I'm trying to find it, but I know I read this where Mr. Voynich, he was doing some kind of retrographs in the dark room or something like that. And under UV light, on the first page of the book, there was a name that appeared, and that name was Jacobus Antonovich. And Jacobus Antonovich was a traveling doctor whose expertise was medical plants. And he lived in Prague around 1608. And very, very interesting. Also, in part of the history of the book, Emperor Rudolph II apparently paid a lot of money to own the book, okay? Because he suffered from depression and melancholy. And so this Dr. Jacobs Antonovich would treat him, and he did well, and he brought him out of his depression, and so he made him chief distiller of something during that time. So it's very interesting. Another important fact with the Voynich manuscript is that there was a letter that came with the book. Did you know about that?
I didn't know.
Yeah, and that letter is dated around 1665, okay? And is from Johannes Marcus Marci to a good friend of him in Rome named Athenaeus Kircher. And this Athenaeus Kircher was a good friend of him, but he knew many languages. Okay, he was a linguist, brilliant. And so he thought, let me send it to Athenaeus Kircher so that he can decipher it. But he never was able to decipher it. So the book comes with quite an intricate history.
Yeah.
And you start following it. There's also a theory that a guy named Roger Bacon, which is named in the letter, might have produced it as a hoax. He was called Dr. Mirabilis, which means a miracle doctor. And he was a scientist, and he was imprisoned by the church, okay? Because you have to remember, the church back then was very protective of its historical events. And so if you found something that contradicted the church history, the church would come down on you pretty hard. Champollion, who was the guy that deciphered the Rosetta Stone, he was also closely monitored by the church because the church was extremely concerned that these hieroglyphs brought history from way beyond when the church was started. And if it contradicted Noah's flood or something like this, they were extremely worried what it would do to the religious following. So, there's a lot of stuff like that goes on.
Yeah. The church has been involved in a lot of stuff.
In a lot of stuff. So the church persecuted Roger Bacon. Okay? They called him an infidel and they stuck him in jail. So, there's a lot of stuff. Again, it's a 200-page manuscript, and lately has actually been studied by scientists. Okay? There's a very famous gentleman, I don't remember his name. He was an expert in something called material sciences. And they've done microscopy examination, light examination, and element examination to figure out the age of the pigments. Because remember, this is on parchment, so it can be radioactively tested for the age.
And they have an age, right? They carbon dated it.
They did. They carbon dated it, and the age that they're saying that the manuscript was written was, and it's very specific because something happened with the pigments where they accumulate in one, they do a spectral graph, and it's extremely specific. So they're 95% confident that the book was written between 1404 and 1438 AD.
Wow.
Very specific. This is scientific stuff. Okay?
Yeah.
And so, it's really interesting. And there's a ton of theories. At first they thought that because some of the pictures look infantile, that it might have been done by a young 8-year-old Leonardo da Vinci or something like that. Okay? Mm-hmm. But that's been debunked because when they studied the parchment, and the pigmentation of all the paint that's on it, okay, the age came out to an area where Leonardo, I think, wasn't even born yet. And so it takes out a lot of people. It takes out that Roger Bacon, it takes out Jacobs Antonovich, it takes out all those guys because they came afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And so it's very, very interesting, you know?
Yeah.
You've got linguistics that have looked at it, and there are characteristic vowels in different languages, words that repeat themselves, phonetic patterns, and then there are, like, you can follow code depictions, like different codes, okay? Like Julius Caesar had a famous code that he had put together, apparently, where he would take the alphabet and just move the letter seven letters forwards in the alphabet, or three. So instead of the letter A being A, they moved it 3 letters forward, so that would be C. So where the letter A would be, you actually would read, like, let's say A, B, C, the third one C. And you can actually write quite quickly. And apparently there was a code like that for some of the instructions to go to war or something. So, you start learning a lot of things about this. And so anyway, they did this material science thing, and they also did the pigment evaluation. And that's how they came with this,
With that date.
with those date. And the pigments are very, very high quality. There are portions of the book that open up into full pages, and
It's intricate.
it, according to them, whoever wrote it probably took 3 years to write it. Another interesting point is that there are no mistakes and no corrections. So, when you're writing something that is this long or whatever,
Yeah.
you would, as a human being, have a tendency to make a mistake, and you're in the middle of the parchment. It's not like we can get the page and throw it away like nowadays. This was, to make those parchments, you had to kill the animal, get the skin, prepare the skin, put it through certain chemicals, put it to the sun to dry.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't know the complexity of it, but it wasn't easy. So you have a page that opens up into 4 sections. The book would have been extremely expensive to produce. You had to have access to these parchments and be able to buy them and put them together like this. And you've got 200 pages of this with tremendous ink pigmentation that are really bright, and then that had to be created also like a lab, I mean,
Right.
you had to mix this with this. There's one that I know they talked about red ochre, which was difficult to make, and it's part of it.
Oh, the dye?
The
use?
dyes. And it's just
bright greens.
Yeah, greens and blues, very vivid, even up to today when you look at the book, really, really vivid. So it's just it's more questions than anything else.
Yeah.
They're thinking that this guy, who was a scam artist by the name of Edward Kelly, could have potentially been involved in it because, there's a thing called, he was a town scribe. There's a thing called like a grill, which is, the grill is it's called a cardon grill, and it's a little paper where you can cut off like 3 or 4 spaces in the little paper, and then you can put that on top of any writing that would have existed in that day, and you can take the little four spaces and create letterings and sentences just by moving it around. So you take the little paper with the four spaces cut off, put it on something like this, let's say, and the letters that show up, you can make a word, and then move it forward, and then make another word, and move it forward and make another word. So, because a lot of...
To create the look of like another language or something.
Right, and it's nothing.
Right.
And so if you did that and nobody could decipher it, the idea behind this particular theory is that it's an unbreakable code that will be broken, but not yet. So you could sell the manuscript for huge amounts of money. And there were a couple people that bought a lot of money, paid money for it before it was donated to the Yale University. And so, there's different theories, but the bottom line is nobody's been able yet to decipher what it says. And I've looked at the pages, and they're online. I mean, it's an interesting book.
Yeah, and it's the writing. It's well written, right? The handwriting that, and it's kind of looks like what is it, like a cursive type of look?
Kind
or
of,
something.
yeah.
It's super interesting, and
it's super interesting.
The drawings are weird.
They're weird,
All these tubes. These ladies are in these pools and these tubes, and like this one, for example, they're saying that it's like has something to do with a woman's anatomy.
Right.
It's off.
It is.
But there are a lot of the letters seem to match. Like there's a pattern to them, obviously.
It seems to, So, one thing to make it clear in our podcast here, they took out Antonovich. He couldn't have done it. Roger Baker, they're saying he couldn't have done it. Leonardo da Vinci couldn't have done it. And even Edward Kelly, okay, who they thought that he might have done it with, because he was a scoundrel, and he actually went to jail, and they cut one of his ears off.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because he forged royal documents.
Oh.
And you forge a royal document, you get in trouble, and so they cut one of his ears off, and he ended up, letting his hair grow, and apparently wearing wigs and things, in the past, so they wouldn't see that he was missing an ear, because if you were missing an ear, that meant you either lost it in war, and he wasn't a warrior, so you did something wrong and you got punished for it, and they took your ear.
Wow.
Anyway, but there is one clue in the entire book. One clue that dates it, to this dates of 1404 to 1438, but also places the book in one particular area. One clue in the book. And I think there's a guy that's been studying this book. He recently was able to look at the original. They actually showed him the original, because he's been like 20 years looking at this, or a long, long time studying this book. And I don't know if he's the one that came up with this, but there is one clue that's extremely important. And they're going to try to use that clue to narrow down in that particular area of Italy and see if they can get more answers. Okay? And what it is, there is a picture of a castle. Okay? And it's got the ramparts drawn and everything. But the ramparts are drawn with something called swallow-tail battlements. And although that became, very common in Europe, because of the date that they have come out that they're 95% sure, okay? Only one particular place in Italy had those swallowtail battlements. So the book is dated 95% accurately to this date. And this is before these swallowtails became very, very popular in Europe. And they actually can trace it to the origins of it. And it's called swallowtail battlements.
And what are those?
They are like in medieval castles. They would have these towers that came up, and then the finish on those towers looked like swallowtails. Okay? They went like this and down, and it was a pretty thing to finish it with. Okay? And, there's a beginning for everything. And that began in a place in northern Italy. And they're focusing on Milan and Venice. But that's where it started. And since the date is associated so strongly now because they checked all those pigments and everything. By the way, the pigments had a lot of minerals. So, it would have been an expensive task. So these swallowtails began in that place in Italy. During this time, it was not popular throughout Europe. So it wasn't popular throughout Europe, so they can pinpoint. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a target now.
They've narrowed it down to that.
And I thought that was super exciting. I'm kind of
no.
nerdy about this kind of stuff, and I said, oh my God, now they have these swallowtails. They can go, because that's where it began. And then they looked pretty to finish off, the castle endings or the towers. And so then it spread all over the place. But prior to the spread, they had to originate somewhere, and this time period sets it there.
Very interesting.
It's super interesting, and so now they're devoting a lot of time and effort and money to try to figure out, because they would love to,
decipher it. Yeah, and you look it up, and some people, it's like, oh, it's been decoded, this and that. I mean, it was a woman's manual. It's a lost language, but no, it hasn't.
No,
right?
It hasn't been decoded. And then one of the last things that I saw in the different articles and videos that I looked at, they said, hey, look, it hasn't been decoded. There's been hundreds of historians, hundreds of linguistics, hundreds of cryptologists, a bunch of computer scientists that are trying to, use the computer and a bunch of ancient language experts that have looked at this thing, and nobody has been able to decode it. That's why one of the guys is saying, look, it's not a real language. It's kind of easy to discard that like that, I like the magic in it. I want to think that it's a real language that somebody was brilliant enough to put together like this, and it's all these people have not had, and these are brilliant people. I mean, the guy that's been looking and studying this at the Yale Library, the Voynich Library, I think it's 20 years or very close to that. He's a well-learned man. He's got information from different languages, different periods. He's like a calculating machine, sharp guy.
Yeah.
And he says, they put him on one of the videos, and he says, the Voynich Manuscript, when I saw it for the first time in my life, I thought, this is something that I can decipher. This is something that I can definitely read. And I've been doing this for so many years, and the manuscript has eluded me, just like hundreds of other people. We haven't been able to figure it out. But it's there, man. It's there, 200 pages of it.
Who wrote it and what for, and yeah, and some people were even saying artificial intelligence will help solve it.
Maybe,
right?
Maybe.
But
we can feed that computer so much information, but it takes the fun out of it. I like to see all these guys, historians, linguists, cartographers, because when you struggle to do something and then you get the fruit of your labors back,
Yeah.
It's like when Howard Carter finally got to the tomb of Tutankhamun, and he opened it up. It was a little hole they put through, I think, and they asked him, "What do you see?" And I think I'm gonna butcher it, but the famous words were, "I see beautiful things, many beautiful things." You know, that feeling that he finally got to a tomb that had not been raided and stuff like that. I mean, the person that, if it is a language that was done to hide something. You know, Leonardo da Vinci was known for writing from left to right and hiding stuff in his paintings and things of this nature. You know,
Yeah.
it was something that was common in those days.
Yeah.
And so it creates a lot of mystery, and it's fun, and I've wasted a lot of time on reading this thing for years and years and years.
Yeah.
But I wanted to put something together for
It's very detailed.
the readers, yeah,
Yeah.
because they debunked all these guys, Antonovich, Bacon, Leonardo, young Edward Kelly, and these were thoughts that throughout the years became very predominant. They said, "Oh no, it's got to be this, it's got to be that." But now, with the onset of material science investigation and the pigments and all this stuff and radiocarbon dating it and all this, you know, that's more scientific.
Right.
And now they have a date, and they've got these swallowtail battlements that they can go back to. I think it's super exciting. I would fly to Italy
go
to
look
find
at
it.
it?
Yeah, go look at it. Can you imagine if they find, because there's a little picture of the castle, right? Now, a lot of castles look the same, but if there was something in that picture that's unique to that particular
Yeah.
castle, then they could find that province, you know?
What? And what's the mystery behind this? What's a castle doing in that book? What is a dragon doing in that book? You know, stuff like that. It just leaves.
Yeah, and the dragon is very rudimentarily drawn, so
Yeah.
what's going on?
Was that added later? Who knows?
And then there's the root system of some plants is extremely intricate, and it doesn't match anything, you know? And there's a couple of plants that resemble some remnants of or part of plants,
Right.
but you would only be able to see it under the microscope.
Oh, interesting.
And the microscope was not invented until later on. And I had the name of the guy here, but you know,
Yeah.
so they're saying, wait a minute, it does look like it.
Yeah, like a sunflower.
Yeah.
They're saying that one of them looks like a sunflower.
Yeah. And then when you look at the molecular structure of it, or you look at it under a microscope, you know what? It's similar to that drawing. But they didn't have microscopes, right? So how did they get to that? Or so it's
And also that there were some extra planets.
yeah.
I think in the zodiac or extra stars.
Yeah, extra stars. It doesn't match exactly.
Yeah.
Super
So,
cool.
Still a mystery.
It's still more
But
questions.
it's cool, and it's something really interesting to look into, and I'm sure it will be solved, one day.
When you look at the video, the guy that's been studying it for so long, you see in his face, you know, his, I'm still at it.
Yeah.
And by the way, Wilfred Voynich dedicated his entire life to trying to decode it. And he passed away and left the book to his wife. And he was never able to find, and he tried a lot of stuff while he was alive, going to different people, different places, trying to see if
Oh, interesting.
yeah. And he just found a book that he couldn't beat. He died, and you know, he didn't.
Wow.
So hopefully this guy that's given so much of his time and life can come up with something, or at least see somebody, because it is open sourced. So you got a lot of eyes and a lot of minds, and then it's the best thing that you can do, because that's how Champollion, he was a linguist. He was a gifted kid in a poor province of France, but he was just gifted, and he went head on against Thomas Young, who was a brilliant English scientist, actually. But the difference was that Champollion was extremely poor, so he didn't have access to a lot of things. And Thomas Young was extremely wealthy, and he actually had the Rosetta Stone in his study, which was huge, and he had some people helping him, you know. So that battle went on to see who would decipher it first, you know. And it's an interesting stuff in history that you go through. It's really cool.
Very cool. Well, thank you for sharing.
All right.
We'll wrap it up there.
Okay, buddy.
All right.